Happy Purim to all our friends at All Israel News around the world. We're going to learn about Purim today. I'm dressed as a ship captain, what I've always wanted to be. Many children around Israel are dressed in costumes. Now, Purim is a celebration from the Book of Esther. Purim is not Israel's version of Halloween. That is something totally different. Purim is rooted in the Bible, in the Book of Esther, which we're going to read, and I'm going to give you two things you may not have known about previously. The first one, what was the king's edict? Was the king's edict to annihilate all its enemies? Partially, but the king's edict was this. In the Book of Esther, chapter 8, verse 11, the king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force of any nationality or province that might attack them. So the king's edict gave them the right to protect themselves. The edict in and of itself did not annihilate and destroy the enemies. And this was a reason of joy and celebration for the Jewish people. At the end of chapter 8, when they learned about the edict, it says in verse 16, for the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. In every province and in every city where the edict of the king went, there was joy and gladness among the Jews with feasting and celebrating. Now note, this is chapter 8 before the great victory, the military victory in chapter 9. The Jews are rejoicing and celebrating because of the king's edict that they have the right to assemble and protect themselves. This was huge. And thank the Lord, today Israel is gathered in its own land. It has the right to protect themselves from its enemies to the north and to the east. Lebanon, Iran, and other enemies of Israel. We have right to protect ourselves, and we remember that here on the holiday of Purim. So that's nugget number one. What was the king's edict? The edict was to grant the Jews the right to assemble and protect themselves. And now for nugget number two. We're going to read from the Book of Esther, chapter 9, verse 1. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, which is the month we're in now, the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. On this day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but the Jews got the upper hand over them on those who hated them. Yes, I love that part. Verse 5, the Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them. So there was a great military victory here in this chapter. And then the end of this chapter, verse 17, says this happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day, the next day, they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. So we see joy at the end of chapter 8, joy in feasting, and joy at the end of chapter 9. So we have two reasons in Purim to rejoice. We rejoice over the king's edict, which was to assemble, the right to protect ourselves. And we rejoice at the end of chapter 9 because with God's help, the Jewish people were able to defeat their enemies in those times, and God willing, in present day as well, the enemies of Israel will be defeated with God's help. So those are two nuggets from the Book of Esther, from the holiday of Purim. I hope you learned something. I just want to wish you, all our readers around the world of All Israel News, a happy Purim. Keep tracking with us at All Israel News.